effective. There must be a better way of doing it than just listening to the traffic news on LBC. So that challenge is about what the industry is going to do about it. James.
Yeah, so anybody that knows me will know that this is a bit of a hobby horse of mine. I find it astonishing that today Google tells national highways and indeed most local highway authorities when their roads are closed and not the other way around. And I don't think it's a question of why is it not possible, but why is it not happening that road authorities can't communicate with drivers in a more sophisticated way? And I tend to think of the opportunity of connected vehicles less with a capital C and a capital V, but more about, as Leon says, the fact that we have almost ubiquitous connectivity with drivers and with vehicle operators, and even before we get on to cyclists and pedestrians, pretty much everyone's carrying a smartphone. I don't believe this is a technology problem. I can say that with some authority. We built an app several years ago which at the touch of a button is able to authoritatively communicate a road closure or indeed a lane closure to pretty much every mainstream satellite navigation channel in such a way that that piece of information can be more or less auto-trusted. And there are plenty of other technology solutions which can augment that or work side by side with that to get good, reliable, authoritative, real-time information to drivers. But what I underestimated when we launched that app, I thought it would be adopted by the industry and would be a real pushover, but I think there are more systemic challenges to getting that technology adopted. But I think the opportunity is there, and I think that opportunity is relevant, very relevant to the future of mobility.
So, I understand that, but does this also mean that we're going to have to wait for a whole generation of connected vehicles to join the park of motor vehicles in circulation? That means we're going to have to wait 20 years, isn't it?
I don't think so. Many of you have heard me say that the average age of a vehicle in the network is 7.9 years. That's getting older now because we haven't sold that many new cars this year. So if we are going to do connected vehicles, I think we are, we've got to think about older things. Vehicles that were built 20 years ago that don't have a head unit, don't have inbuilt sat-nav, as well as the new vehicles which people are buying. And the answer to that, as you said, is mobile phone. And we've been working on a number of projects to look at the way that you can collect data from that phone, via the vehicle, but also give messages to the vehicle, very much in line with what James says. And one of the things that Steve and I have been working on is connecting up very old vehicles, and this Sunday there were 3 vehicles in the London to Brighton run, built in 1900, 1901 and 1904 that will be connected. So I think you don't need to wait for connected vehicles, and certainly not for autonomy. And I think that's probably one of the challenges why James is so right, is that we've kind of been able to put all this off for a bit and say, oh, we'll put some variable message signs out there, will do. But now Google, TomTom, Garmin, Apple, you name it, are getting really good information. You said about traffic radio. Traffic radio is still really well trusted by a certain demographic of people, particularly at weekends. They would love to have really good, accurate information as well as sat-nav. So I think it's really important that we think of a wide range of users, and not just road warriors on motorways, freight. There's a whole host of problems where freight are told that the road will be closed. They reroute the vehicles away from, say, a regional distribution centre, and then find it wasn't closed after all. That's really annoying, it's a waste of resources, it's an impact on the environment. Really want to fix that. So I think we need to think about all sorts of users. We need to think about cyclists, we need to think about people on horses, we need to think about old cars, new cars. We need to think about all this future connected world. But if we don't get it right now, what hope have we got for a highly automated vehicle if we can't even say that the M5 is closed?
Okay, and in fact that brings out a question, doesn't it, which I'll come to Steve with, which is currently we mostly tell road users what we believe is happening, but we leave it to road users to decide what to do with that information. And that's everything from ignoring it, piling on into the disruption that they've been warned about, to making their own diversionary routes, or relying on their whatever AI, whatever sat-nav they might have in order to go around it. And for me, there's always 2 questions. There's the purity of the information, or what the user does with it when they've got it. What do you say, Steve?
Well, I think that you're right. I found myself arguing with the sat-nav. And I don't particularly take well to being instructed to do things. I'll decide if I'm going to change lane, thank you. And I suspect many drivers have a similar reaction to being bossed around by their vehicle or by a system. And I think one of the challenges, if you like, for highway authorities is the right solution to make the network run as efficiently as it can might mean you get there before I do. Because I get sent on the diversion route and you get sent through on the express route. And that's fine so long as I never discover it. I think most people are happy if they think their sat-nav has uniquely benefited them and they're not too worried about if everyone else was held up. So I think what I would say is when we're talking about the benefits of connectivity, you've got to do two things. You've got to zero in on what is the benefit we're talking about, and if that's the benefit, in whose interest is it? The second thing we have to do is follow the money. Because it's all very well for us to say, wouldn't it be great if we're buying a public benefit, but somewhere in this picture, somebody is going to be spending some money, otherwise the tech doesn't happen. So, as James says, I don't think that there's an insurmountable tech issue here. It's, are we posing a question clearly enough with a commercial opportunity that will get somebody to provide a tech solution and provide it to us, which is one of the things the transport technology firms will want.
And just building on that point, Steve, how do we deal with this is true for many optimization routines. The same applies for mobility as a service. Optimized, sure, but optimized for who? Optimized for me as the user, optimized for the provider, because that's how they make more money, optimized for society as a whole in order to minimize, I don't know, emissions or congestions or delays or whatever. So there is a question about optimized for who. How do we deal with that?
Well, I would start off by saying you've got to recognise that that tension exists. The people who've gone out and bought proprietary sat-nav systems have done so principally because, well, they might just be lazy like me and don't want to look up where they're going on a map. But also, they're buying, hopefully, directions that would give them the drop on the rest of the traffic. And that's why they're doing it. And that's the commercial proposition. And it's not what I think national highways or what highway authorities would ideally go for. I think we're going to recognise the tension and think, well, if we want that to change, what's got to be true? So what would have to be true for the fuzzy logic behind, say, a TomTom system to optimise the network, as opposed to just make sure that people go down another road? And there is a safety aspect to this as well, with questions increasingly being asked as to whether in seeking out the time that takes least to travel, we might actually be sending vehicles down less safe, less suitable roads, which I think is something we all want the systems to avoid.
You touched on safety there, Steve. I think the benefits do go much wider than road user experience and more reliable journeys. I mean, that's definitely part of the business case, but safety is a big one. And I think that, you know, the first autonomous vehicle that kills or seriously injures a road worker will be a scandal that the industry will struggle to recover from. It is indefensible that activities that are planned with loving detail and great precision in advance are not able to be communicated with equal precision to vehicles. And when the robots are driving, that's going to be vital. There's a safety case to be made today, but in the future of an autonomous vehicle fleet or a partially autonomous vehicle fleet, it's going to be absolutely vital that authoritative real-time communication of disruption is routine and ubiquitous.
And I take the point, James, but it is the case that humans in this country kill 1,500 people a year. We already tolerate 3 or 4 deaths a day by humans. So what you're saying is the system not only will be much safer than that, it'll have to be.
I think it will have to be because the moral equation changes when it's a robot that does the killing.
So that moves us into the area of increased automation. And I don't mean the paradox of going decimal overnight we'll move from manually driven vehicles to autonomous driven vehicles. What will happen, I think we'll agree on, is that automation will be progressive. So I'm going to ask this of Andy. Are these limitations that we're discussing really preventing the development of the next stages of autonomy?
I don't think so, because we've lived to learn, and we learned to live with mixed fleets in railways. You get Flying Scotsman uses the main lines. He's equipped with enough tech to identify where it is. Recently, steam loco did over 100 miles an hour. It was teched up with more sensors than an Apollo mission. We live with Spitfires flying out of Biggin Hill, equipped with tech to identify them to the business jets that are landing there. I think we need to think about using the technology that we have to identify slow-moving things like horses and veteran cars and combine harvesters or whatever. I think also we need to think very, very carefully about what roads we will be using first for autonomy. Certainly the country lanes may not be a good idea, but motorways might be. I think we also need to do a huge amount about driver education. Not by driver, I mean people sitting in the vehicle education on the high levels of autonomy. We've learned that from smart motorways. If you've bought a car recently, do you read page 497 of the user's manual? No. So you don't know half the tech that you've got in your car at the moment. It's going to get worse. A lot of the features that you can get in a new car, a few people turn off because they don't know how to use it. So as we get to higher levels of autonomy, it will be a real problem. When we get to full autonomy, and I don't see that happening anytime soon, then that might go away, but there are still problems then of drivers, vehicles breaking down, what do you do, all that kind of stuff. And there's discussions about taking over vehicles and driving them remotely and those sorts of stuff. I think we just need to learn to walk before we run.
And what about connectivities of things that are not normally connected? So, the most obvious case is you would want, wouldn't you, an RFID chip in the harness of a guide dog, so that connected vehicles will spot the guide dog at some distance. But there'll be lots of examples where there are things that are not normally connected, that if they were connected, life would get easier for us. Is that the first thing?
Well, I think we've got to distinguish between an ideal world, I would say, in which that is quite likely to happen, and I would say we need to plan for, dare I say, the real world. So, for example, I was reading a very interesting piece this morning about some trials in Australia where, through using V2X technology, one vehicle can be alerted to the presence of pedestrians by vehicles around the corner and has picked up the fact that there are pedestrians, and that's how you know what's around the next corner. I think that any highly automated system is going to have to work around the limitations of our infrastructure and around some of the limitations of how we behave. Because the alternative in a built-up area is we'll have a mass scale return to barriers stopping pedestrians doing what I do. I can tell you, walking around in any city centre, the desire line I have for where I walk is, I'm here and I want to be over there. And I'm damned if we're going to go all the way down the end of the road to a designated pedestrian crossing. And the system needs to accommodate that. And rather like Andy, I tend to think motorways offer themselves as, to me, the most likely place where automation could take over from adaptive cruise control. But I don't think that automation can be reliant on national highways, making sure that every sign is visible, nothing is obscured by foliage, every line is clearly visible, and by the way, every surface marking is visible in all light conditions, including just after heavy rain. They're going to have to cope with those challenges.
Indeed. And so what you're touching on there, Steve, as well, is then the vehicle itself being a source of data, as well as being a recipient of data. So it could be broadcasting to anybody who wants to know anything about skid resistance, anything about conditions, anything about weather. I mean, the most obvious one of all is weather, isn't it? Because frankly, every connected vehicles could provide the weather forecast. Because if it's raining, the windscreen wipers are working. Every flick of the windscreen wiper is a bit of data, and if the windscreen wipers are working, chances are it's raining. In which case, the vehicle has just generated a very local weather quantity.
I think the potential of the sensed information coming from connected vehicles is almost limitless, and it is a very, very exciting area. But it seems to be the area that most of the investment is focused on, which I think is to the detriment of the power of pushing information to vehicles and drivers, which potentially has more societal benefit. And I'm still marvelling at the recent NASDAQ flotation of a company called Wejo, which has a market capitalization of $1 billion, and they are basically a broker of connected vehicle data. Fabulous and very, very interesting and exciting. But actually, what we're seeing in our relationship with almost every local highway authority in the country is a lot of expectation upon them to be more sophisticated with dynamic information that they need to make available to drivers around, whether it's zoning for low emissions or whether it's no traffic neighbourhoods, more and more sophisticated and dynamic traffic management, and being able to communicate with drivers. Ultimately, as Andy says, the age of our fleet is increasing, not decreasing. We can't wait for every vehicle to be armed with the latest sophisticated connected vehicle technology. We can certainly leverage the sensing data, the subset of vehicles that is armed with that technology, but we can't wait for that to happen in order to be able to change the dynamic between road authority and road user. But that dynamic does need to change, and I think the expectations of society will dictate that it will change.
So the one I'm really excited about, which I can't wait for, is how connected vehicles and infrastructure connectivity allows us to book our loading and unloading or parking spots at the curbside. Because the curbside is a finite resource, and there's a whole lot of curb you can't use for safety reasons. There's curb space that you could use, but at the moment the waiting, loading, parking regulations are very simple. They're very simple because they have to be explained on signs, and humans can only understand signs as very simple. But there is in fact no reason why, in the opposite direction to the peak hour, even on a red route, you could sanction parking or loading or unloading. So it seems to me an obvious step forward for connectivity is for us all to be able to program pickups and set downs, whether it's people at destinations, whether it's freight, whether it's taxi, private hire, whatever it is. And so instead of aimlessly cruising around the streets looking for a spot, actually your spot is pre-programmed. So for me, I think an exciting thing about optimizing the movement of traffic and benefits to society is going to be not in the moving, it's in the stopping. Andy?
So we're already kind of working on that. So the parking restrictions you spoke about, they're demanded by traffic regulation orders, as indeed are temporary closures of roads. There's some work being done on digitising those to make them the sort of data that a vehicle could use, James's company could use. A couple of local authorities are experimenting with those to see how we take the piece of paper that was published in 1971, and when you ask for a digital copy of it, they send you a scanned PDF of it, and make that into JSON or XML, so it can be eaten up by systems. There's a lot of backlog to do there, there's a lot of tying up of stuff, but it's a very, very clean idea. And there's a number of companies such as Grid that are already exploring just what you say. A perfect example I take is where I live, there is a school opposite. There is a yellow line that says no parking. That yellow line is actually only really needed between about 8:30 and 9:30, a bit at lunchtime, and 3:30 and 4:30. It's not needed in August, it's not needed in Saturdays and Sundays. So if we had dynamic parking, we could be opening that up for the high street, we could be opening that up for some uses, but then have it enforced when we wanted to. And there's a whole load of work being done about things like digital signing, digital payments to enable that. So don't give up painting yellow lines just yet, but it's all being thought about, and the legal basis of it is being thought about most of all.
And don't give up observing them as well. Steve?
I was just going to say, I think that one of the challenges we've got in all of this is, at what point do we say, for example, if you're going to come onto the National Highways Network, the motorway network, you will be expected to have a smartphone clipped up there or in-vehicle system that connects you, because we are going to be telling you things not just over the gantries. And if you haven't got that, potentially you're not welcome, because we think that anybody who's driving in, say, 2030 will have that.
In the same way you wouldn't fly into London airspace without an overseas transponder on board plane, so if you're going to come on the road network, you have to be connected in a way. So then, very quickly, because we're coming to the end of our time, I'm just going to ask each of the panellists a hybrid version of the original question, which, like all the sessions like this, we may have answered, and we may have answered a quite different question. But my question was, I'm going to ask the panellists one at a time, just quickly, what is the next thing that the industry needs to do to make sure that we can make the next step forward in the progression of connected vehicles? Steve?
The industry needs to get on board with the Transport Technology Forum and get into conversation with highway authorities to understand what it is they're hoping to achieve better, and therefore come up with better targeted tech solutions.
Thanks.
I think we need to put the communication of authoritative information from road agencies into connected vehicles at the heart of the economic agenda, and I think that will rely on a change to how contracts are let for road workers, for example. I think that actually putting this on an economic footing, making the business case for better information to be provided to connected vehicles, will actually stimulate wholesale change.
Finally, Andy.
I think go and have a wander around the SME area around there. You see a load of companies that are developing some really exciting new ideas. I think with it, that's the key to moving away from putting something at the side of the road to measure something to we can measure it from a vehicle, or we can put a channel into the vehicle. And there's lots of it around, you just need to find your way in it. It's in this room.
Brilliant. So we're out of time, ladies and gentlemen, so I have to bring us to a halt at that point. So thank you very much indeed to Steve, to James, and to Andy. Thank you for being an audience. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to go to questions, but that's the function of being, as ever, tight on time. But since I come from the bus industry, I'm hopefully happy, I hope the organisers are happy that we're punctual today and are finishing there on time. But for all of you, thank you very much indeed.